Fire without hesitation, and the enemy would be swept from the skies. But beneath the surface, cracks were opening. The United States Army Air Forces had learned some hard lessons. High-altitude bombing against ships had failed. Torpedoes were scarce, and delivering them was too risky. Something had to change. In workshops scattered across Australia, a new idea began to take shape, one that defied convention and ignored doctrine. A transformation moved into being, hidden from Japanese eyes, waiting to strike with a fury no sailor could imagine. The birth of the B-25 Strifer did not begin in a factory or in the polished halls of strategy, but in the dusty heat of an Australian aerodrome. There, among improvised tools and the urgency of war, a US officer named Paul Papygun pushed the bounds of convention. A former naval aviator turned Air Force innovator, Gunn had seen enough failures to know something drastic was required. High-altitude bombing against ships was almost useless. Torpedoes demanded skills and resources the Air Force did not possess in the Southwest Pacific. If Japan's vital arteries were to be cut, the answer had to be born of ingenuity, not tradition. Gunn's vision was simple and radical. Convert the medium B-25 bomber into a flying fortress of direct fire. At Eagle Farm near Brisbane, he and a small group of mechanics removed the airplane's glass nose. In its place, they bolted steel supports, ammunition belts, and the heavy Browning .50 caliber guns. At first there were 4, soon there were 8. 8 muzzles pointed forward, ready to unleash a torrent of destruction. It was an experiment born of sweat and improvisation, strengthening the nose to withstand recoil, balancing ammunition loads, preventing jams during violent dives. Each challenge was overcome by trial, error, and sheer determination. The weapon they created was monstrous. Each .50 caliber fired incendiary armor-piercing projectiles at almost 3,000 feet per second. Together, the 8 machine guns could spit nearly 7,000 rounds in a single minute, enough to shred steel superstructures, silence anti-aircraft gunners, and turn a deck into a slaughterhouse before the bombs were even released. The sailors who later faced these modified Mitchells described the sight as terrifying. 8 flashes of light erupting from the nose, as if the plane itself had become a demon spewing fire. When General George Kenney, commander of the 5th Air Force, saw the prototype, he immediately understood its potential. He didn't ask for permission, he demanded more. Soon, entire squadrons of B-25 Mitchells were being modified, their elegant bomber lines transformed into brutal instruments of destruction. What had begun as a field experiment quickly evolved into a doctrine: low-altitude skip bombing and strafing. Instead of attacking from high above, the B-25s would roar in barely 50 feet over the waves, firing as they came. Their machine guns would sweep the decks clean, killing gunners, shattering bridges, and blinding crews moments before releasing their bombs at point-blank range. The first of these deadly machines took flight over New Guinea in early 1943. Their arrival changed everything. Japanese convoys that had once sailed confidently under the cover of anti-aircraft fire now found themselves helpless. Each raid began the same way, the distant hum of engines, then the sudden scream of aircraft bursting through the clouds, guns blazing. Trace of fire stitched across the sea like burning threads. Ships erupted in fountains of smoke and flame. Even heavily armed destroyers could not stand against this storm of lead. Pilots quickly learned that at such low altitude, speed was life. They came in so close that salt spray coated their windshields, and the smell of burning oil filled the cockpit. Navigator Bill Benton later wrote, "You could see the enemy sailors' faces. You could see their fear. There was no time to think, only to attack, to survive." The modified B-25, stripped of its glass nose and elegance, had become something new, something terrifying. A gunship bomber, a predator built to hunt ships and shred them apart with raw firepower. By mid-1943, these aircraft were striking Japanese shipping lines across the Bismarck Sea. Convoys were annihilated in minutes. What had once been proud formations of transports and destroyers were reduced to flaming wrecks, drifting helplessly in the surf. The Japanese began calling them the Black Death, the planes that appeared from nowhere and left nothing behind but burning metal and oil-slicked seas. March 3rd, 1943. The skies over the Bismarck Sea darkened with storm clouds and vengeance. 8 transports, 8 destroyers, thousands of soldiers. They thought they were safe. But when the sky suddenly roared with fire, entire ships were torn apart like paper. How had simple B-25 bombers become ship-killing monsters that Japan never saw coming? The sea boiled with fire and steel. Black smoke clung to the heavens, while men screamed from shattered decks, their voices drowned out by the thunder of engines and the crack of explosions. In a matter of minutes, what had been a proud Japanese convoy became a floating graveyard of twisted metal and drifting corpses. One observer later wrote, "It wasn't a battle, it was an execution." American planes struck with machine-like precision. Some came in so low their propellers sliced the waves. The first attack waves strafed the decks, cutting down gunners and officers in seconds. Then came the bombers, dropping their loads at point-blank range. Bombs skipping across the water like stones before slamming into hulls and detonating below deck. Transport after transport erupted into towers of flame. Japanese destroyers desperately tried to shield the transports, their anti-aircraft guns blazing, but it was useless. The American B-25s were too fast, too low, and too furious. When the smoke finally cleared, all 8 transports and 4 destroyers were gone. Over 3,000 Japanese soldiers and sailors were dead. The rest drifted helplessly amid burning oil and debris. For the men of the 5th Air Force, it was proof, brutal and absolute, that the new tactics worked. Low-altitude gunship bombers could annihilate entire fleets without the need for torpedoes or naval support. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea became a turning point, a message written in fire across the Pacific. Japan no longer controlled its own waters. From that day forward, the B-25s ruled the seas. Each mission refined the technique further: better coordination, faster approaches, heavier guns. The crews grew more daring, diving through flak so intense it looked like a storm of black rain. And at the heart of it all, the aircraft that began as an experiment in an Australian workshop had become the most feared hunter of the Pacific. The B-25 Strafer. From that moment on, the skies over the Pacific belonged to the B-25 Strafers. No longer were they bombers merely dropping ordnance from above. They had become hunters, sweeping the seas clean with fire. The Japanese sailors, who once looked to the horizon for safety, now looked to the clouds in terror. They spoke of aircraft that came like demons, guns blazing, tearing ships apart before the sirens could even sound. In the months that followed, these modified Mitchells led mission after mission across New Guinea, the Solomons, and the Philippines. They dove through anti-aircraft fire, shredded supply convoys, and left trails of burning oil that stretched for miles. Their pilots called them flying sledgehammers. Their enemies called them devils of the sea. The genius of Paul Pappy Gunn had changed everything. From a dusty airfield in Australia, his improvised idea, born out of desperation, forged from scrap and courage, had rewritten the rules of aerial warfare. He had taken a bomber meant for altitude and turned it into a weapon of precision and brutality at low level. Each mission proved that innovation, not tradition, would win the Pacific. When news of their success reached command, the transformation spread. More bombers were converted. New versions rolled off the line, already armed with the fearsome 8-gun nose and rocket mounts under their wings. The U.S. Air Force had found its ultimate ship killer. By 1944, Japanese convoys could no longer move by day. Every island, every port, every stretch of coastline within range of a B-25 became a death trap. Fuel, food, and reinforcements never arrived. And behind every burning ship was the echo of those 8 guns, roaring like thunder over the endless blue. In the end, the B-25 Strafer became more than a machine. It was a symbol of American ingenuity, of the will to adapt, of victory carved from necessity. Years later, when veterans spoke of it, their eyes would still light up. Not from pride alone, but from awe, that something so brutal, so unstoppable, had once been built with nothing more than steel, sweat, and faith. The Japanese called it Shinigami no Kaze, the wind of death. But for the men who flew it, it was freedom with wings of fire. But sheer firepower alone wasn't enough. Guns innovation merged with another desperate invention, skip bombing. American pilots, guided by Major William Benn of the 47th Bombardment Group, practiced for weeks against the rusting hull of the SS Pruth, learning to drop bombs just above the sea's surface so they would skip across the water and strike ships at the waterline. It demanded nerves of steel. Pilots had to fly straight toward their targets, low, exposed, tracer rounds scraping across their canopies. And yet the accuracy was undeniable. The bombs bounced like stones, hitting with brutal precision where high-altitude bombing had always failed. When General George Kenney, commander of the 5th Air Force, saw the combination, he instantly understood its potential. Machine gun fire to sweep the decks, skip bombs to rip open the hulls. Together, they turned the B-25 into what Kenney called a commerce destroyer, a machine capable of annihilating convoys in minutes. By early 1943, entire squadrons were being converted, their noses bristling with cannons, their crews training relentlessly for the mission that was coming. What emerged from those makeshift workshops was more than a modification. It was a revolution. A bomber reborn as a predator, an aircraft that ignored doctrine and promised to reshape the balance of power in the Pacific. And soon, over the waters of New Guinea, the Imperial Navy would learn what that innovation truly meant. The Convoy glided across the pale morning sea of Bismarck, 8 transport ships carrying soldiers of the Japanese 51st Division. They leaned against the railings, smoking, talking quietly, unaware of the fate stalking them. They carried rifles, bayonets, and dreams of reinforcing their comrades at the front. They wrote letters that would never be delivered. Others stared at the endless horizon, trusting the Imperial Navy to keep them safe. Around them, 8 destroyers cut sleek silhouettes through the water, engines humming, crews alert and confident. For a year, Japanese ships had crossed these seas unchallenged. There was no reason to expect anything different. Aboard the destroyers, officers kept their gunners in constant training. The 25mm cannons gleamed, freshly polished. 5-inch guns were loaded and ready, rangefinders busy. The doctrine was clear. If American bombers came, the steel umbrella would rise. Sailors repeated their drills again and again, aiming and tracking invisible targets, convinced that discipline and firepower would protect them. They had repelled attacks before, they would do it again. For Admiral Masatomi Kimura, commanding from his flagship, the mission was dangerous, yes, but not impossible. Far to the south, in airfields carved from the jungles of New Guinea, another scene was unfolding. American and Australian crews prepared their Mitchells and Beaufighters. Mechanics tightened machine gun mounts, checked ammunition belts, and wiped the oil from their hands onto stained uniforms. Pilots gathered in the dim light, studied maps, tracing routes with calloused fingers. They knew what awaited them. Low-altitude raids through walls of enemy fire, engines roaring just above the waves, and the ever-present chance of not returning. Some sat silently, staring at photographs tucked into their flight jackets. Others cracked nervous jokes, hiding fear behind forced laughter. The air smelled of fuel and tension as crews loaded bombs fitted with delay fuses. The plan was simple, brutal, and never before tested on such a scale. The B-25 strafers would descend first, unleashing torrents of 50-caliber bullets to obliterate the anti-aircraft gunners. Then the skip bombs would skim across the sea like deadly stones, striking the hulls with surgical precision. Everything depended on perfect timing. Coordination meant survival. Failure meant disaster. At dawn on March 3, 1943, the engines roared to life. Propellers bit into the humid air, whipping up dust and debris around the runway. Pilots of the 3rd Attack Group, along with their Australian comrades, took off one after another, their planes bristling with guns and determination. Below, mechanics watched them disappear into the clouds, knowing many might never return. Out over the ocean, Japanese lookouts scanned the horizon. They expected high-altitude bombers, maybe torpedo planes. They didn't expect what was coming. Predators flying just above the waves, armed with noses full of guns, about to turn the sea into fire. The stage was set. Two forces were moving toward each other, destined for a clash that would leave one side shattered forever.